Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. In this series I'm working my way through defensive handgun cartridges. Kind of a primer for new people who are looking at concealed carry, or maybe just a little reminder and history lesson of where these rounds came from and what they can do for us today for people who are experienced users. I mentioned in the first episode with the 380 that I recommend 380 as a power floor for concealed carry, up to 45 auto, perhaps the 10mm as the high end of semi-automatic pistols. For police or military, I think the 380 is only suitable really as a backup gun for them. They're dealing with truly crazy people sometimes. They're dealing with intervening cover, having to shoot through car windshields and things like that. So really, moving up to the next one, what we're going to talk about today, the 9mm, is a better choice for uniformed folks who carry a gun. So if you want to know what I think about the 9mm, stick around. Okay, I kind of hate to admit this because I'm a Jeff Cooper believer and 45 kind of guy, but when people ask me to recommend the single best defensive pistol caliber for them, I generally recommend a 9mm. It is a step up from the 380 in power, yet you can still get it in some very small, easily concealed pistols. It brings a power level that is more reliable in terms of both expansion and penetration in our test medium that we use. If magazine capacity is a big deal for you, then you're gonna like the 9mm much more than a 45 or a 40. And all that thing needs to be balanced out. The capacity, the power, the size of the pistol, that's a very personal thing that each of us has to work through, and like some of us, one isn't enough, so we will probably have more than one pistol that we might choose for concealed carry. But one thing I can't really discuss the 9 without at least touching on the 45, because that's the age-old ultimate controversy, 9mm versus 45. And I will tell you this, I did a video on the FBI claiming at one point that the 9mm had improved so much that it was as good as a 45. And the word I used to describe that was bullshit. And I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. If you look at the most modern bullet technologies out there, the 9mm do perform much better than they used to. But the thing is, when Speer or Winchester or Federal or whoever introduces a new bullet technology, they don't just make it in 9mm. They make it in 9, 40, 45, and often 10mm as well. So to say that a modern 9mm will beat a modern 45 in terms of expansion and penetration is a load of crap. Modern 9s might beat older technology 45s, but folks, it's simple physics. 9mm are often a 115 grain jacketed hollow point, where the 45s are available in 230 grains. Diameter doesn't matter. You're throwing twice the lead to begin with. It has to be at least as good as the 9mm and probably better. So you make all your arguments, you do all your gun shop commando routines you want. I'm not saying the 45 is enough better that you should never use a 9mm. I recommend the 9mm. I'm just saying, don't give me your line about how it's better than anything else. It's good enough. It's not better. Especially if you are facing an adversary behind automotive glass. My last video, I show you what happens shooting through a video. And I referred you to a high-speed ballistics YouTube video that shows very clearly how badly the bullets are destroyed when they go through automotive glass. So if this is something you think you have to deal with as a police officer, as a military individual, launching more lead to begin with will get more lead through the windshield to do more damage behind. I've heard it all before. Yes, the 9mm go through glass pretty well, especially the critical defense. And yes, it penetrates to the minimum of 12-inch standard when it goes through the gelatin. But you're still hitting with half the lead. Okay? I'm not saying the 9mm is bad. I'm just not buying the hype. It's called physics, and it's really hard to beat. The 9mm Luger cartridge is the oldest we have out there, and it's reliable. When Georg Luger was designing what would become the P08 Luger pistol that was used in both World War I and World War II by the Germans, the German military specified a caliber larger than the 7.62, or roughly 32 caliber, of the Borchardt pistol, which was one of the first semi-automatics out there. So that German requirement gave birth to the 9mm Luger cartridge. At about the same time, the U.S. military had left the single-action Army thumbbuster in .45 Colt, which was a very reliable performer, and they had replaced it with a Colt double-action .38 caliber revolver. In the Philippine insurrection, we were shooting some rather crazed and drugged opponents there, and the .38s were seen to be very, very ineffective. In fact, so ineffective, the Army hauled out some of those old 1873 Colt single actions and put them back in service. They also instituted a thing called the Thompson-Lagarde pistol testing, where they shot animals, cadavers even. They recommended a pistol caliber in a semi-auto no less than .45 caliber. So here again, Europe thinks 9mm is pretty big stuff. But over here in the United States, we like .45s. In fact, in our pistol testing, Luger made and provided for the test 3 Luger pistols, upsized Luger pistols, chambered for the .45 ACP. But as that test progressed through several steps, they were becoming so successful with the Luger in Europe, and their production demands were so high, they backed out of it. I think Lugers are really cool and in my opinion, really accurate pistols. I'd love to get my hands on one of those .45s and put a few rounds through one of those someday. So in World War II, the Germans issued both Lugers and the newer Walther P38 sidearms. And the Walther P38 had a big influence on the United States after World War II, because the Walthers could be carried with the hammer down, round in the chamber, hammer down, with a trigger cocking system similar to a revolver. It was a double action auto pistol. It could be fired single action with a cocked hammer, or it could be fired double action with the hammer down, and the long heavy trigger stroke would cock the hammer and then fire it. That became a big influence after World War II for a lot of U.S. police sidearms. And of course the military sidearm that we had, the 1911A1, was single action. Hammer had to be cocked. And since our military has never really thought about instant use of weapons, the manual of arms for the 1911 was to carry it with the chamber empty, the hammer down, so requiring you to cycle the slide chamber around, get the hammer cocked to single action, and be ready to go. After World War II, when the U.S. police agencies in the 50s and 60s started looking at semi-autos, Smith & Wesson brought out their Model 39, which was a copy of the Walther-style double-action auto trigger mechanism. And the agency I'm retired from, the Illinois State Police, was the first major agency in the country to adopt a semi-auto pistol. It was a 9mm in the Smith & Wesson Model 39. The 9mm ammo we have here in the United States has always been loaded to lower levels than the Europeans did for their pistols. Over the years, I've known several guys who had Lugers, either brought back by their fathers from World War II or they had bought on a surplus market somewhere. And among them, they had the Luger had a kind of a reputation of not being very reliable. And that's because that toggle link action needed a certain power level to reliably function that action. And 9mm ammo in the United States generally didn't have enough kick to do it. But over the years, we've seen that 9mm loads in the United States pushed up, pushed up, pushed up. One particular failure of a 9mm duty load was in the notorious 1986 FBI Miami shootout with some bank robbers. During this event, One suspect was hit by a Winchester 9mm silver tip load, which was the duty load for the FBI at the time. The way the bad guy was positioned, it went into his arm, went through several inches of arm tissue, muscle, exited into his chest, and was headed straight for his heart. But it didn't make it to the heart. The bullet expanded well. It penetrated a total of about 9.5 inches of tissue and stopped. And Platt, that suspect in that fight, he did a lot of damage after he took that hit. And eventually he was put down by the FBI, but not before a lot more death and destruction than there should have been there that day. So a lot of people have said that that was a failure of the bullet. So people have claimed that that silver tip load was a failure of a design. It was not. That bullet was designed to expand well and penetrate about 9.5 inches. It did almost exactly what Winchester intended for it to do. The problem was he had to penetrate arm tissue before it got into the body. The outcome of that we'll talk about as we go into other calibers like the 40 and the 10mm when we get there. But the FBI used that shooting to drive both pistols and ammunition and helped create the 8-part terminal ballistic test that we use now. They did that in conjunction with Dr. Marty Fackler. He was an Army colonel whose job towards the end of his career was to develop a reliable way to test bullet projectiles from rifles and pistols and predict what they would do in the body. So Dr. Fackler invented the whole field of terminal ballistic study. And he took that to the FBI and where they do an 8-part test. So they shoot bare gelatin and they shoot heavy clothing. They shoot automotive metal, automotive glass, sheetrock, plywood, building construction, things like that. There are 8 different parts to that test. They specify a minimum of 12 inches of penetration in the gelatin to be a successful load. That's based on that 9.5 inches of Platt in that FBI Miami shootout. So that's where that 12-inch minimum came from. If you shoot somebody, a simple, uncomplicated shot into the front, they don't have heavy leather coats, they don't have body armor, certainly 8 to 9 inches of penetration is going to get through the body of most people, most normal-sized people. But I can tell you as a cop, sometimes we deal with people who are not normal-sized, and they're going to need that 12 inches even on a frontal shot. But 12 is not excessive at all, and they will accept up to 15 or 16 inches of penetration before they get concerned about over penetration. But what we see now with the 9mm are both plus P and plus P plus loadings. Plus P meaning extra pressure. The final ammunition used by the Illinois State Police when they moved from the 9mm Smith & Wesson pistol to a 40 caliber Glock, there was a custom Winchester load loaded strictly for law enforcement. Other agencies could get it, but they had to kind of get in on the bid cycle because they ran it once a year. That was a 115 grain jacketed hollow point bullet. It was actually the same bullet in that FBI shootout. It just wasn't nickel plated so that they could call it a silver tip. But in the ISP loading, it's loaded at plus P plus pressures to give about 1,300 feet per second out of the 4-inch barrel of the Smith & Wesson pistols. And that's one of the reasons that they swapped pistols several times in the course of using that 9mm, because that hot load wore those pistols pretty badly. Okay, the higher the pressure, the more it's going to wear your pistol. If you need that level of performance, then you just have to put up with a pistol that's not going to last as long. I think plus P 9mm is good, plus P plus is okay, depending on your bullet and depending on the load. So, back to history. In 1985, the U.S. military adopted the Beretta 92 pistol as the M9. They brought out the M882 9mm cartridge, which used a 112 grain full metal jacket projectile at about 1,263 feet per second, I'm told. I have never used the M882. I've never tested it or verified what it does. And the pressure of that is at least a plus P and maybe edging up into the plus P plus category. So they did that because NATO specifications for the 9mm are quite a lot hotter. And they wanted to make sure that as we swapped ammo around in the case of a war, that somebody else's ammo is going to work in our pistols and our ammo is going to work in their pistols. So we've seen the 9mm lifted up from the lower loads that we've traditionally had here in the United States. Most of the NATO ammo uses a 124 grain full metal jacket, which was the original bullet weight, and it is pretty much plus P plus pressure standards. Now, at one point, the 40 Smith & Wesson, once it was introduced, it took off kind of like a rocket. And I think the 40 and the 9 were kind of neck and neck in how many U.S. police agencies were firing those from their pistols. Lately, we've kind of seen some police agencies step back a little bit. They've dropped the 40, and generally they're going to a 9mm sidearm. Most notably, the FBI dropped the 40 a few years ago and went back to the 9mm. But when you look at civilians' concealed carry, combined with law enforcement use, combined with the U.S. military using the 9mm, they've left the Beretta behind and now are carrying SIG M17s or M18s. The 9mm is the #1 defensive pistol cartridge in this country by a wide margin. I do not disparage the 9mm. I have carried the 9mm more in a duty holster as a cop than I ever did any other caliber. But interestingly, at the end of my career, when I could carry whatever I wanted, I carried a 45. I think either will do. I labeled the 380 as marginal. But the 9mm delivers enough power to both expand a hollow point projectile and drive it into a depth of 12 inches or more, reliably in our ballistic test media. Loads are available in many bullet weights from 90 grain, in conventional hollow points, I think from 90 grain up to 147 grains. 47 had a following when it was first introduced. I think people have backed off that a little bit. It is at its best when it's used in a suppressed weapon because the 147 load is subsonic, so it's going to be very quiet. If you are picking a jacketed hollow point bullet, I think if you pick a plus P loading, something from 115 to 135 grain bullet, that's probably going to be one of the best self-defense loads you can get your hands on. If you want to go to the plus P plus and accept a little bit more wear on your hardware, that's your choice. A number of years ago, I ran a research project for the Old Police Marksman magazine, which is defunct now, and this was published in 1993. We analyzed 241 officer-involved shootings, and the reports that we got were filled out by the officers who were in the shootings. So this is a study of the winners. They won their gunfight and were able to report about what happened. The average number of shots per incident for all calibers, and we had a number of calibers, the only 4 duty calibers we kept track of, were the 38 Special, 9mm, 357 Magnum, 45 Auto. The 40 S&W did not exist when we were doing the research. It came on the market towards the end. And the only high-capacity semi-autos in common use were 9mm. So as I said, the average number of shots per incident, looking at all calibers lumped together, was about 3.5 shots per incident, which follows our old 3, 3, and 3 rule. The 9mm events were significantly higher. They averaged 5.5 rounds per incident. Not double, but significantly higher. So you got to ask, did the number of rounds go up with the 9mm because you needed more of them to get the job done? Or, as I suspect, is it simply because the cops had more bullets available, so they fired more bullets? As I mentioned with the 380, there is another category of bullets out there in all the calibers, for the 9mm especially, and that's the Lehigh Defense Bullet, the FTM, they call it, Fluid Transfer Monolithic. Solid copper bullet, kind of a X-shaped, or some people call a Phillips screwdriver head at the tip with those deep flutes. And the idea is that these bullets going through, they're all copper, so they're lighter than normal lead core bullets. They're going faster generally. They kind of liquefy the tissue they go through, and that tissue gets funneled out of those flutes. A lot of weapon experts over the years have said that something changes in bullet impacts once it gets to about the 2,000 foot per second level. Jeff Cooper mentioned it. I have seen it in my water jug testing, that when you get above 1,800 feet per second, I have to change my conversion formula for penetration because they behave differently at those kind of velocities. One of the engineers who designed these things told me that the interesting thing about them is that this flute is curved, and he described it as being similar to the wing of an airplane, where, you know, the air goes farther over the top, less distance under the bottom, and so that less distance allows it to lift. He said the jet of liquid coming out of these flutes in many cases exceeds 2,000 feet per second. So if you believe in these things, you believe that they penetrate as deep as a full metal jacket, but do tissue damage equal to a hollow point. Now, the wound ballistic purists don't buy that. They consider this really nothing more than a fancy, gimmicky kind of full metal jacket. But I have seen some street reports of agencies using these things, and I'm kind of buying into it. I think that these might be the wave of the future. So in terms of 9mm, there's a range of sizes of pistols that you can get that are perfectly viable concealed carry pistols. Some of the smaller ones here. This is a Kimber Micro 9. This is my current everyday carry. I'll show you that it is unloaded and safe. This is a mini 1911 style pistol, so it's a single action. Hammer stays cocked, safety goes in place, safe to carry that way. Very easy to shoot, very small, but much easier to shoot than several other small 9mm that I'm used to. My previous everyday carry for concealed carry before that was a Car CM9. Again, I'll show you that it's empty. This is a polymer frame, whereas the Kimber is an aluminum frame. These are, in my experience, very reliable little pistols, and they have a completely different trigger system than most of the polymer guns. Instead of a pre-cocked, semi-pre-cocked striker system like a Glock with a 5.5 pound trigger, these have a long trigger, very similar to a double action revolver or to the little 380 Bodyguard. So in my experience, you're not going to rattle off shots quite as rapidly as you can with a striker fired gun, but maybe it's my upbringing with a revolver, but that lets me stay on target a lot better. I will find myself anticipating recoil, jerking the trigger just a little bit with a striker gun. This prevents that. So the Car, I think, is a really nice little option. You know, I got the Car factory night sights and replaced that, so it has day-night capability. The most common 9mm pistol used by anyone nowadays, obviously, is the Glock. They have the lion's share of the market. Again, unloaded and safe. I have this mounted with the loopholed micro Delta Point red dot sight. I tried other red dot sights on Glocks and other pistols, and the sights that are in the way, so many of them are going with the high suppressor sights that will co-witness with the red dot. It's just busy for my eye, and I know a lot of my friends, at least my age, who don't like the sights and the red dot. So I thought, well, I'm going to trust this red dot to work. I'm going to take the sights off with a slick slide. I haven't made up my mind yet, but it can be faster and it can be more accurate. So I think this type of red dot, or the regular red dot if it works for you, certainly a wave of the future, even for concealed carry. This is a Glock Model 48. So height and length, it's about exactly the size of a 19, which is their most popular model, except it's thin. They call it a slimline. So this is a 10-round single-stack magazine instead of a 15-round double-stack magazine. To me, this makes all the difference. The Glocks, I can shoot the Glocks, they're okay. My hands aren't that big, but I can handle those big grips. But this is so much easier to use. Or, call me a FUD if you like. This is a lightweight Commander that I have. Again, I will show you that it's empty and safe. This started out life as a 45 alloy frame Colt Commander in 1952. They were the lightweights were introduced in 50. They were not called lightweights until later, when Colt made a steel framed version of the Commander that they called a Combat Commander. And from that point on, then they have called these the lightweight Commander. I'm going to talk about the hot 9mm loads as we go along, because there are not a lot of proponents of the 357 SIG, but they are very vocal and they really love their cartridge. And the almost exact twin to that is the old 38 Super that Colt brought out in 1929. Jeff Cooper had worked with the Super in the late 70s. And what he found was the 38 Super case was built more like a revolver case, and where the feed ramp in the pistol allows the round to be chambered, that's not completely supported in full semi-auto pistols. And if you started hot rodding the 38 Super, you would blow the case out at that point. And I have blown a couple of them, and it's really exciting. If you have wooden grips, it'll usually split them. It'll blow the grips off. It'll blow the magazine out. Makes your hand sting really, really bad. So what he did, with the advice of Major George Nante, a guy who worked with Shooting Times, they used 223 rifle brass and cut it, reamed it in some cases, but they essentially made an extremely strong 9mm type pistol with the specifications of a 38 Super case. When Jeff Cooper did it, he had Barstow make him a 6.5-inch barrel, so he's working for maximum velocity. And he launched 90 grain hollow points at 2,000 feet per second. Well, I thought that was so cool that me and my buddy Dick Heine, we started the first IPSC club east of the Mississippi here in Illinois. And Dick went on to become, I think, the preeminent 1911 custom builder. So my 45 Commander, he found a 38 Super slide, fitted it up with a Barstow barrel. I just went with a standard length barrel, and created the Super 9. Started cutting 223 rifle brass, and I didn't get 90s to 2000 because I didn't have the same barrel length, but we were throwing 115 grain hollow points at over 1600 feet per second. I used a couple of Winchester shotgun powders that had no handgun loading data available for them, so I just started real low and worked my way up. 540 and 571 shotgun powder, which I didn't know at the time, but 30 years later I found out is the same as HS6 and HS7 ball powder that was available from Hodgdon. And that's the kind of powders that were giving us those screaming velocities. So not too long ago, to make use of cheap ammo, I took this back to Dick Heine and I said, okay, now take my 38 Super Slide and fit me a 9mm barrel. So on this same frame, I can shoot 45s, 38 Supers, or 9mm now. So this is a very viable 9mm full-size pistol. And interestingly, the 1911s, I mean, there are more 1911s being sold now than at any point in history. They're really at the peak of their popularity. And a lot of them are being made in 9mm, both commander size, officers, smaller officer size, and the full 5-inch guns. Pick up a couple of rounds of capacity. You go to a 10-round magazine with a 9mm in a 1911. So the 9mm, here's the bottom line. It is clearly the #1 choice for defensive pistol cartridges in the United States, probably in the world. I personally recommend the 9mm as the best choice for most shooters, military, police, or civilian. And as I said, I've spent more years as a cop carrying a 9mm than any other sidearm. So here's my one-word adjective. I called the 380 marginal. I'm going to label the 9mm Luger adequate. It's not a ball of fire, but it is a perfectly adequate defensive pistol cartridge. What word do you think I'm going to use to describe the 45 ACP? Because that's the next one I'm going to talk about. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah. That's all there is till next time.